8. Welcome to geography class today. In chapter 3, lesson 3, we're studying world economies. This can be found on page 94 in your textbook, or you're welcome to use your online textbook to follow along. Here I'd click on chapter 3 and I'd open up to what would be lesson 3, world economies. Click go, and it should load to look like this. We have 3 sections to take care of today in our reading. The first is the idea of this basic economic question. After we're through that basic economic question, we're going to look at the different economies that are in the world and how countries build economies. And then thirdly, we're going to look at not only individual countries, but this idea of a global or a world economy in which the things that are being produced and bought and sold in our country might actually be coming from other countries in the world, and what we're producing and making in our country might actually be bought and sold in other countries as well. This idea that we're connected through these different economic activities that are happening. Now that we have those 3 things that we are looking for, I want to make sure that you have your note page in front of you and that you know what you're going to be doing in each of those 3 note sections. In the first section on the basic economic question, the directions ask you to use the resources or supplies that take care of our wants and needs. As you read this section about those resources, define 2 types of energy resources and list examples of each. Renewable resources, find my definition. Non-renewable resources, find that definition. Again, the basic economic question focuses on the resources that we have, the difference between want and need. A lot of times that's based on what's available, and those different types of availability are something that are renewable and other things that are non-renewable. In the second section, as we learn about how nations have built their economies based on the resources that they have, you're going to read in your textbook and fill in the blanks that describe the different types of economic systems that different countries use. That's for numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Lastly, as we look at the different ways that these countries build economies, we're going to now recognize that these countries are connected through what is a global economy. Different countries are trading with other countries, or different peoples, different places have different resources, and they're selling and trading those goods with other parts of the world that have different goods, so that we can have the wide variety and wide selection of all the things that we could possibly want. In this section, the directions ask you to use an acronym. An acronym is a shortened version of a longer name taken from the first letter of the word in the name. For each of these acronyms below, spell out the full name and tell how the organization or agreement is related to the global economy. There are different acronyms that are used to talk about and identify the different types of activity that's happening in different parts of the world. So as you're reading in this section, you're going to come to the words itself, and then they're going to use the acronym later on so they don't have to spell those words out in full. When you find one of those words, when you find one of those acronyms, then write the definition or the description on what that organization is doing and how it's related to the global economy. Okay? You've got those 3 activities to do as you're doing your reading. I'm going to walk you through what would be the key points from each of these sections. It might be beneficial to watch this video, then go back and do the reading. That way your reading is going to be enhanced by understanding some of these things ahead of time and having that background knowledge already built up. Let's jump into it. I want you to think right now and make a list in your head of the things that you want. If you had enough money right now, what would you want to go out and buy? What would you want to purchase? And Mr. Shane thinks about this and the timing that we're making this lesson. It's probably going to be around different types of deer hunting things, or hunting equipment or hunting clothing that I need for the upcoming season. Now, I have some things already, so I don't necessarily need them, but these are things that I want. It'd be brand new, sparkly, shiny toys to go out and use. You're probably thinking something differently, but what are the things that you want to buy? If you had the money, what would you want? What would you want? What would you want? Now I need you to switch your thinking and think about, if you didn't have that money, what are just the basic needs that you have to have met? What are the basic needs economically that you need to have each and every day? Well, if you're thinking like Mr. Shane, I need to have food, so I've got to buy groceries, or I got to buy myself lunch. I need to have water or something to drink, keep me hydrated. Those physical needs need to be met. I need to get the right amount of sleep, and hopefully when I'm sleeping, I've got a roof over my head that's providing shelter for me. So I've got food, water, shelter, clothes. Those basic needs are what are going to govern a lot of our economic choices. Now you're going to find out that the way in which our country operates and the way in which other countries operate, that when it comes to our wants and needs, we've got a plethora of things that are at our fingertips. A ton of different options when it comes to food, water, clothing, shelter in comparison to other countries. Even so, we actually think a lot more about our wants and the things outside of our needs, and sometimes we take those needs for granted. The reason why I asked you to think about wants and needs is because this is going to be the start of our study in what is the basic economic question. How do we go about making economic choices? A lot of times it's based on what's available to us. First, it's going to be based on our needs, then it might be based on our wants. Depending on where you live and the resources that are available to you, you might have a lot more access, like we do here in America, to a lot more of our wants and kind of look past what those needs are. I also want you to think about, if you got to choose your country, what country would you want to live in? We just thought about wants and needs. What if you got to choose the country that you wanted to live in? You had to design the economic system. Here are 3 different examples, and I want you to think about which of these places or which of these economic systems you'd like to live in the most. Number 1, resources are distributed mainly through families. Farming, herding, hunting, and gathering are the primary means of providing resources. Mr. Shane, I think, would love to live in a circumstance like this, because every single day you wake up, it's all about survival. You got to grow your own food. You got to keep track of your livestock and take care of your animals that are going to provide for you. And you got to hunt and fish and gather to get the things that you need every single day. Nothing else matters besides survival in this circumstance. Maybe that's not for you. Maybe it is for you. Let's look at the next one. Number 2, means of producing resources are privately owned, and distribution of these products is based on sales and the demand for products and resources. You want to live in a country where there are private companies. Those private companies have an ability to produce something. They're making something, and then they're making that thing for sale. If you need shoes, you go out and buy shoes. Maybe you've got a favorite shoe brand that you're buying. Well, thank goodness that there's this privately owned company that produces and then sells those items based on your demand. Number 3, the means of producing resources are publicly owned, and production and distribution are controlled by the government. The difference between 2 and 3 is that privately owned businesses means that I can start a business myself, or someday you can start a business yourself if you were interested in being an entrepreneur. The idea of it being publicly owned means that the government owns it, and the government controls it. Here's an example. A privately owned company would be Amazon. Amazon does a lot of their distribution. You might see Amazon trucks driving around delivering products to people all over the world. In number 3, a publicly owned company or a publicly owned form of government would be the United States Postal Service. The United States government runs this entity that does the same thing. It distributes products and sends the mail from place to place. Now, these are a mixture of these two in the same type of economy, but what if you only had to pick one? Would you want it to be privately owned in which you could own a business, or want the government to control those things and you can't have a say in how those things are being distributed and how that production is taking place? We're going to come back to this because these are actually 3 different examples of different types of economic systems in the world, and based on what you're thinking right now, you're going to come to understand where these are used and how they're used and how one might be better than the other based on what you learn next. As you read through page 94 and 95, you're going to come to understand this basic economic question. The basic economic question is 3 parts: what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce it. The bottom right-hand page of 95 shows this example. There's a new drug that's being developed. Well, why would we ever need to make a new drug? Why would we ever need to make a new medicine? Well, there's got to be a who that this needs to be produced for. Obviously, if people are sick, they're going to need a medicine that is going to solve the problem. You might hear about a vaccine that's being produced for our pandemic right now. Well, how are we going to produce this new drug or this new medicine? The things that go into producing the drug and the medicine are going to be the different types of scientists and researchers and the people who are going to do the different types of clinical trials. And the last thing is how you go about producing it. So what to produce? We need to make this new drug. How to produce it? There are scientists, researchers, doctors that are going to do the kind of heavy lifting on how to get this thing ready to be available to the public, and for whom to produce. Obviously, the people who are patients and people who are doctors need to treat those patients with those different types of medicines. So you can see in this graphic here 3 different ways in which all these things are working together. The what to produce would be a company that's making something. How to produce it? In our world, the government kind of controls the way in which different types of drugs are made. The Food and Drug Administration controls those things to make sure that they're safe for people. Scientists and researchers do all the different trials that lead up to this being available to the public, and for whom. And obviously it's being made for the patients, but the doctors are going to use it and prescribe it to people so that it helps and makes them better. A lot of times these three economic questions, what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce, are based on the wants that we have. Wanting somebody to get better, wanting somebody to be cured of a sickness is a legitimate way in which we would want to go about and attack this economic question, but also based on the resources that are available to us. If you continue reading, you're going to identify that those resources are either renewable, that means that there's something that can totally replace, they're naturally available. Here's an example of a waterway. It looks like a river that is dammed, and when that water is dammed, you can control the water that flows through. This is creating kinetic energy. From that kinetic energy, you can harvest what's hydroelectric electricity. So the movement of this water creates energy that can be turned into electricity. That is going to be a unending renewable resource because this water is always going to be there, and this is always going to be functioning to produce electricity. The opposite of a renewable resource is a non-renewable resource. You might see oil tankers like this carrying what would be fossil fuels, oil across the ocean from place to place where it's produced and where it's being consumed. That oil as a fossil fuel is a non-renewable resource because eventually down the road it could possibly run out. It's not being replaced fast enough. It's not being regenerated fast enough in comparison to how much we are using it. After we've got those resources in place, people meet their wants and needs by using resources, both natural and human. Renewable resources can be totally replaced and are always available naturally, while non-renewable resources cannot be totally replaced. Because of limited resources and unlimited wants, people must make economic choices. This is important. A lot of times there are resources available and sometimes there aren't resources available, and as humans we kind of fall into this greed and have these unlimited wants. But we can't just buy everything that we want. We can't just make all these economic choices without having to have some type of thought process go into what's the best way for me to spend my money, what's the best way to make economic choices. Three basic economic questions again are what to produce from somebody who wants to make something and sell something, how to produce it, how to go through that production and make sure that it's legal, and then for whom to produce. So you want to make sure that when you're producing something, there's somebody that wants to buy what it is that you're producing. In the next section, we're going to go back to those three different country proposals that I showed you. Which one did you pick? Did you want that survival country? Did you want the privatized country? Or did you want the government to control everything? As you read through on page 96, 97, and 98, you're going to learn about the different ways in which countries have built economies. Here are a couple examples of the different economic systems. The first is a traditional economy in which individuals and families decide what to produce and how much based on their needs. So here's an example of that first one that Mr. Shane talked about, which is a survivalist type of system. You are waking up in the morning, you or your family decides what you're going to make and how much you need, in which you're just going to be then living off the land in this traditional sense. In this traditional sense, a lot of times throughout history, economies have been based on this idea of bartering and trading rather than on some type of currency or economic exchange like money for goods or services. A market economy, a capitalist economy, in which the owners of a business decide what to produce and how much. The price is based on the market. Example, in the United States, we've got a market economy. There are people that own businesses and they produce things that are either goods or services. Goods are things that you and I can buy. Services are things that somebody's going to do something for you. So, for example, Mr. Shane needs a haircut. He can go to Sports Clips, and what they're producing, their hairdressers are producing the service to cut my hair for me because I can't cut it myself as good as they can. So I'm going to pay them to do that activity for me, and therefore their company, Sports Clips, is making money off of what they're producing. You can also go to a store and buy something off the shelf. If you're going grocery shopping, those goods are something that you're going to consume, not something that somebody's going to do for you. So the difference between good and service comes up in that market economy. A command economy, also called socialism, is the one in which the government decides what and how much to produce and determines prices. Here's an example of North Korea. Another example would be Cuba, in which the government in a communist or socialist way controls all these different aspects. If you like name brand things like Nike and Adidas and the different types of clothes and shoes, You're more of a fan of what would be a capitalist economy because those are private businesses. In a command economy, the government controls what those businesses are. The government controls the shoes, the clothes, even the food that you can have and access at the different stores. If you trust the government enough, then socialism is where you're going to want to lean. And if not, then capitalist is where you're going to have the idea of maybe being an entrepreneur someday and being able to start and run your own business without that type of government oversight and or regulation. The last one that's listed is a mixed economy. The mixed economy is a combination of market and command economies in which you've got a little bit of both that's happening. The United States would probably be called a mixed economy because there are government agencies and government entities that are doing things that are really similar to what private companies are doing. Like the United States Postal Service is an example of that government-controlled company that is doing different types of services, shipping mail, shipping goods to people that are buying things over the course of maybe online shopping, or something's being sent from a business to somebody's home, or from another business to another business. The United States Postal Service is taking care of that, but there's also private companies that do the same thing. Amazon does something like that. UPS does something like that. FedEx does something like that, to where you've got a combination of privatized businesses and also United States or government businesses. As you continue reading through the section on countries build economy, you're going to come to learn about the different types of economic activities. In a socialist economy, society controls all aspects of the economy. In a free enterprise economy, individuals and groups decide what to produce, and shoppers choose what to buy. Factors of production in any economy are included in the land, labor, and capital. So based on the size of your country, a lot of times is going to influence what resources you have available to you. The workers that are in your country are going to produce certain things, so the skill level of those workers is going to determine what you're able to produce, and the capital, as in the value that that item has. If you don't have capital, you don't have cash, there's going to be a hard and difficult way for businesses to get off the ground and to actually get running, because if you've ever heard the term, it takes money to make money. You've got to spend money to make money. In order for businesses to be up and running, they first have to spend money. A lot of times businesses or entrepreneurs are taking out loans so that they have a ton of cash flow, they have a ton of capital right up front, so they can pay their employees to then start producing things. Once those things are being produced, then they're making money and paying back on what that initial borrowing was. You might have heard this term before, GDP, gross domestic product. The gross domestic product is the definition of the total dollar value of final goods and services in a country, and this can fluctuate. If we're having really good economic activity in our country, the gross domestic product goes up. If it's bad, we're in a recession, it goes down. A lot of these factors are based on how the economics, or how the consumers and buyers and producers are going through their daily life, and it's a lot of times based on how successful things are at that point. Another factor in production is the standard of living, productivity, and all measures of economic performance. So as you read about economic performance, there's a couple factors that go into how an economy can be really good or really bad, and you might be thinking of certain countries that are in better positions than others. In our country, we'd call ourselves a first world country because we have all of these things that are working. We've got electricity, water, sewer, paved roads, all these wonderful developed things. In other countries where that gross domestic product and that standard of living is less, they might not have some of those basic amenities that you and I have. So that would be the difference between an economy that is more developed and is further on, maybe has more resources, versus an economy who's kind of behind in the times in terms of what's being produced and what's available to its citizens. The next portion of our economies describes the different levels and the different types of economic activities. There are different parts of the economy. For example, there's the agricultural industry that grows all the different foods. There are different service industries that provide services for people that need things done for them. There's different types of industries in terms of just simply manufacturing, building things, creating things. When those things are built and created, that's the retail industry that you're going and buying things. And there might even be an example of another industry or services being done when somebody's cooking food for you when you're going to go out and access those things. So there's different parts of the economy that have been industrialized, which these are the places that people are working, these are the places that you and I are spending our money. Now, in this economic system, there's three different levels. The primary level are what are called new materials or raw resources. We're going to work ourselves backwards. The next one is the finished good. So once you have a raw resource, you turn that into a finished product, and then that finished product can be sold. And a lot of times, some people don't know how to make that finished product, so they just pay somebody else to do that for them. Here's an example. The third one is a tertiary. That's the third part of the economy in which somebody's actually doing something for you. If you've ever gone out to eat at Red Robin, this is the example of the tertiary part of the economy in which somebody's cooking food for you. You probably could cook yourself, but it's sometimes convenient to have somebody make something for you. In Red Robin, they make specialty burgers that are really delicious that might be better than you could make yourself, so you're willing to spend your money there. Well, when you're at Red Robin, where do you sit? Well, at these tables, and you've got all these wonderful things that are in this store. Well, how did they get there? Somebody had to produce those. Somebody had to make the lights, somebody had to make the tables, somebody had to make the salt shaker, and all those different pieces of material. Where did those things come from? Well, that's the second part of the economy. See, we're working backwards. Those are the finished goods. Well, how did those finished goods get there? How did you build a table? To build a table, you obviously had to get wood. To get wood, you're logging those materials from the forestry industry. Those things are then being produced into what would be a finished product. Those finished products are being bought by this restaurant business so that people can sit at those tables and eat, and then they're having you come into that store and then consume the goods that they're producing for you. So there's three different levels to this economy. You've got the basic natural resources. Those resources are then built into something. Those built things are then going to be bought again by another company and used to then help them make more money in that third level of the economy. Hope that helps your understanding in all these different ways in which the economy works. There are three different levels. The tertiary service is our services, where somebody does something for you. The second level is where you're producing something, a finished product or a finished good. And the first level is the primary resource, or that natural resource that needs to be first harvested and then can be turned into something else. In the last portion of your reading, you're going to learn about the global economy. And one major aspect of that global economy is import and exporting. Importing means something is coming into my country. Exporting means something is leaving my country. And I have a picture here of where that import and export happens right in Milwaukee. Garden Homes neighborhood is right up here at the top of the picture, probably on this north side of Milwaukee. Here's the downtown area. Here's Summerfest, just so you can kind of get this little geographic understanding. And here's the port of Milwaukee, where these big, huge ships, they bring in their goods and they can park and then unload those things to go into the distribution in the rest of our state. Obviously, the highway comes right by here, so semis can come and load those things up and take those things to all the different places that they need to go. Different businesses for different business activity, or to the store itself where things can be bought and sold. Import, something's coming in. Export, something is exiting and leaving. Because there are imports and exports in the form of sea travel and waterways and airways and trains, we have what would be called a connected and global economy, in which things that are being produced in all parts of the world can be sent and shipped to and then bought and purchased by all other different parts of the world. A lot of times this can be advantageous because something doesn't grow or something isn't produced here in the United States. We can buy it from a different country that does produce it because they have those resources. But it can also be a disadvantage because then certain countries can actually take the things that they have and hold them at a higher value. Or they could tax you for sending your goods to a different country and promote them buying the goods in that country itself. For example, in the United States, we can produce certain things that other countries can't, and in the United States, we can't produce certain things that other countries can't. I don't know if you look outside, but it's getting colder and colder and colder. The leaves are starting to change. We can't grow things right now because it's the end of that growing season. It's harvest time. But you can still go to the grocery store and still get strawberries, even though strawberries aren't growing. Well, somewhere in the world, strawberries are growing, and those strawberries can be sent to our country, and then you can buy those at the store. Well, what if a country doesn't want those goods to come to you, or what if they want to make more money off a place because they know that country doesn't have those things? So there can be advantages and disadvantages to the way in which those interactions take place. In the global economy, countries of the world both import and export products. In free trade, a group of countries decides to set little or no tariffs, no taxes or quotas on products traded among themselves. Trade can help build economic growth and increase a nation's income, but it can also result in a loss of jobs. How does it result in a loss of jobs? Well, if I'm relying on a different country to make something and then just send those goods to my country, if somebody in my country has that job, I just remove that job from them because I'm not letting them do that job. I'm just buying the good from somewhere else. We call this outsourcing, and a lot of times it comes under a lot of political scrutiny, because if I have people working here in the United States and producing something, that's wonderful. But if I can find somebody who can work for cheaper in a different country, companies might pay their company to move to a different country because they can pay the laborers less and take away the jobs from those in our own country. So there are advantages to it in which free trade offers the way in which countries can kind of make money back and forth on each other, and there's a benefit to that. There's also a way in which it can be disadvantage because people might lose their jobs, or there might be these difficult tariffs and taxes that happen between countries as they're competing with each other. As you read through that last section, you're going to learn about all these different organizations, and that's where you're going to fill out these acronyms. So you might hear WTO as World Trade Organization. You might read about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Those are different organizations that are helping to promote economic activity, and you're going to understand a little bit more on how those agreements have been made and why those agreements are in place, hopefully to benefit the countries that are taking place in those type of activities. Your assignment is to make sure that you've completed all of this page, and then when you're done with that reading in this page, complete your online quiz that should be assigned to you. If I go back, click on your student edition, should be assigned in that assignment section. Again, God's blessings.